Hello lovely people, I am back with another instalment of book chat for you today. We're going to cover quite a few things this time, so I'm going to try and be brief, although I have all of the thoughts on all of the things.
Sophie Vlogs.
I'm just going to dive straight in and start talking about stuff. First up, we've got something that I've read on my Kindle, and that is Carrie by Stephen King. I first read Stephen King, I read it when I was 13, which was, my then boyfriend was reading it, and I was like, ooh, because I want to read all the things. I was like, I'll try Stephen King, and it was really scary, because I was like 13. So I never finished it, and I was like, oh, Stephen King, he's not for me, because I don't really read horror. I'm not great with, like, scary things. I have talked about this a couple of times on my channel. If you're not familiar, I am co-host of a podcast with my friend Mark. We talk about stuff that we like. We take it in turns to pick topics. So he chose Carrie as his theme because he really loves the book, and so I have read it for the podcast. I won't talk about it too much because I will be talking about it in the podcast, which is probably out now, and I'll leave a link below if you can listen to it. Suffice to say, I flipping loved this book. I was so taken by surprise by it, because in my head I've just been like, oh, scary stuff, but it's not really like scary in the way that it was scary. It's sort of like, I found it really interesting as just this examination of just like the awful things kids do to each other, which they do, and then sort of like the horror story, you know, like some of really effective horror like just takes things that happen and just takes them a step further. And so it just sort of like throws telekinesis into the mix, which was cool. I particularly liked the way the narrative is told. You have obviously like narration, but then it's like interspersed with like excerpts from newspaper articles, scientific reviews, interviews with people, the trial as they were trying to figure out afterwards what happened, like all of this stuff, which in some ways means that you're like foreshadowing, like you know stuff that's going to happen. Obviously I know stuff that's going to happen anyway, because Carrie has become such a part of cultural consciousness that you're aware of like the prom scene. But I haven't seen the film yet, but I will be watching the film to prep for the podcast. So I'm now really interested to see how the film takes it, because I feel like the version of Carrie that's in the cultural consciousness is very much that film version when she's covered in the pig's blood in prom and stuff like that. And I've heard that the film has more of like a typical horror movie ending than the book does. Suffice to say, I was really pleasantly surprised. I whisked through it. It was a really quick read, and having listened to a couple of other people's reviews as well, that seems to be a common thing. People seem to be like, ooh, this reads really fast. So yeah, I really liked it. Second up is Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. I'm just really enjoying non-fiction at the moment. There's quite a few non-fiction in this because I'm having a moment. I'm really enjoying reading like just non-fiction that's like people's experiences and people's thoughts and stuff. I'm just finding that really interesting rather than like necessarily like academic stuff. This is just part of my mission to actually like read more feminist literature so that I can make like my own thoughts and opinions on stuff. This is a series of essays. They cover different topics, so they're like broadly split into different topics. So we've got me, gender and sexuality, race and entertainment, politics, gender and race, back to me. One of the essays that I really liked was Beyond the Measure of Men, which was talking about women in publishing and the ways in which we measure women's literature against men's literature, whereas in actuality we could just measure women's literature as like its own entity. We don't have to constantly be comparing these two, like they're separate things, and women's literature doesn't have to be the same as men's literature for it to have value. That was really interesting. I really liked that one. I found a lot of these really interesting. These are just, you know, you read a bunch of essays and then you find like a couple of specific ones are like just picking at your brain and you're mulling them over. This is not a devaluing statement, but I could really tell that she writes a blog because rather than being a super academic text, these were very accessible to me in the way that they read. I found them very easy to read, both like language-wise and also like the text is quite large in my edition, so it was just like, it was quite accessible as a book. I would essentially say that I think it's quite a good start point if you're interested in reading more about feminism, because it talks a lot about a lot of very sort of like situated in the real world and lived experiences rather than being like some hypothetical theoretical stuff. But yeah, I liked it, I enjoyed it, it was enjoyable. I'd definitely read more Roxane Gay in the future. After that we have Kingdom of Sleep by E.K. Johnston. This was in my birthday book haul. I got it with my birthday vouchers. I really loved E.K. Johnston's A Thousand Nights. This is not a sequel necessarily, but it's essentially set in the same place, just like a couple of hundred years later, and the story picks up and it's looking at sort of like one of the descendants of one of the characters from A Thousand Nights. I personally still love A Thousand Nights most, but I did enjoy this a lot. It's a retelling of well, it's a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but also with like a little bit of Rapunzel thrown in stuff. It's like a mishmash a little bit. And whereas A Thousand Nights had storytelling running through it as its like central theme, this has the idea of spinning and of weaving and that sort of thing as its central theme that runs throughout, which I really liked, because just as A Thousand Nights taps into that like storytelling as power thing that I adore, this one taps into this whole like Penelope in the Odyssey and Helen in the Iliad and weaving the fates of men and all of this like wonderful evocative imagery to do with like weaving, in this case spinning. Oh, love it. Here for it. Really enjoyed it. In this version there's like a curse put upon the princess, and it's affecting all of the people who are spinners. Spinning is like how this entire society like thrives, and then the curse sort of like stops them from being able to do that. So the narrator is the child of a spinner who worked in the royal household who's had to leave, and then stuff happens. The shenanigans ensue. They kind of have to return there, and then they obviously meet the princess, and stuff happens, which I enjoyed. I found myself with this, I was getting closer and closer to the end, and I was like, we have less amount of pages to sort this all out than I thought we would. It was fine, it was just, you know, when you're reading something and you're like, I feel like there's a lot to resolve here, when are we going to do this? But it was really good, I liked it. I also completely shipped two characters who I thought it was going to be like, yes, this is a thing, and it was not a thing. Someone had a thing with someone else. If you have read this, could you please tell me if you also shipped a ship that was not the ship of this book? Too many ships in one sentence there. We're gonna stop this book. Next up, because I have lost all track of what number book we're on, we have Permanent Faithful Stable, Christian Same-Sex Marriage by Jeffrey John. I am all about, at the moment, any form of LGBT plus non-fiction. I want to read all the histories and I want to read all the own voices. Jeffrey John is a priest in the Church of England, and he's also a gay man. So this was first published in 1993, which is the year I was born. And then it was amended in 2012. So this was really interesting to read, given that I am not religious and bisexual. I am bisexual, that's not saying he's gay, I'm bisexual, just to clarify. God, this is a shambles. Suffice to say, this is like sort of just, it's tiny, it's like a little pamphlet-y sized thing, because at the time Jeffrey John was arguing against a church that was very homophobic and was trying to be like, hey, same-sex relationships are just as deserving of being allowed to engage in Christian marriage as heterosexual relationships. I am not the target audience for this book. I am bisexual, not gay, and I don't believe in God. So this was more of just like an exercise in reading someone else's point of view for me, rather than like, I need to read this to have my opinion on same-sex marriage like challenged or affirmed or anything, because I'm like entirely for it. I really appreciate where this text is coming from. I can see how it must be a great help to a lot of Christians who are specifically gay and lesbian, because that's really what is focused on in this text. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's said in this, and that's not in a I think same-sex relationships are bad kind of way. It's in the opposite, whereas I think they're great and perfectly fine, and I don't think that they need to end in marriage for them to be good and okay and wonderful. So that's like my stumbling block with this text, but then I'm not a Christian, so that would, you know, affect my ethical code, I guess. But I don't need to agree with the text completely to think it's probably a good thing that it exists. So this was interesting, if nothing else. I feel like I've really stumbled my way over this review because I'm like, here are my thoughts that I don't necessarily agree with, but also, it wasn't written for me, so that's fine. Shall we continue with a different book? Let's do that. After that, we've got Saturday Night and Sunday Morning by Alan Sillitoe. I would just like to apologise in advance if you can hear my laptop in the background. It sounds like a small aeroplane trying to take off. This book, it was published in the late 50s. This was lent to me, and it was interesting to read as a product of its time. It's not my favourite thing. It focuses on Arthur Seton, who he works in a factory. He, weekends and weeknights he has off, so he drinks a lot and is essentially having affairs with one or two married women. As the book goes on, you can see how maybe that gets a bit complicated and shenanigans ensue. But, this is one of those sort of, angry young men books where it's like this person kind of railing against the society they're in and stuff like that. Arthur is one of those characters who I don't like as a person, but is perfectly fine to read about in a book. I don't think you're supposed to like him. Maybe it's just because I'm not a man in the 1950s, so I'm like, this guy's making some weird life decisions, and his attitude towards women is poor. Suffice to say, if you want a picture of working class life in the late 50s, this is a good book to read. If you're looking for something different, then it's not. Top-notch reviewing here on my channel. Right, penultimate book is this one. This tiny adorable book is Emma by Jane Austen. This specifically is my grandmother's copy from September 1948, which May gave her for her birthday, and it's flipping adorable. I tried to read this so many years ago, back before I had reread Pride and Prejudice and decided that I liked it, and it just didn't get me. I got a couple pages in and I was like, oh, what is this? Now I'm a Jane Austen convert, so I read this because the topic that I chose for a podcast recently was Austenland, the film. I'll include a link to that below as well, should you wish to also listen to that, but suffice to say, I've gone on a Jane Austen journey and I have now become a convert. However, I've only actually read Pride and Prejudice. Everything else I've consumed has either been film adaptations or adaptations based on her stuff, so like the Lizzie Bennet diaries, stuff like that. I really enjoyed this, and I ultra enjoyed it because I read this whilst rewatching Emma Approved, which is by the same people who did the Lizzie Bennet diaries, and it is the similar thing where it's a modern retelling of Emma, but they did it as a YouTube series, which is sort of like, in Lizzie Bennet diaries she's vlogging. In this one it's like she's documenting her greatness because she has a matchmaking firm. Obviously she does. This was great. You know how I was saying that in Saturday Night and Sunday Morning I didn't like Arthur because he wasn't a very likeable person, blah. Not to the same extent, but Emma at points is not very likeable because she's making all these decisions for other people and judgments on other people and all stuff like that, but I still really like this book and her. She doesn't have to be making really wonderful life choices for me to be like, oh, this is a good book. So this was just lovely. I really enjoyed it. I have two other Jane Austens in my to-read boxes. I've got Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park. If you have read them and are like, here's some great adaptations of them to watch while you read them or something, please let me know, because I'm always interested in Jane Austen adaptations. Apparently it's a thing I like now. Finally, we have a book that I really super enjoyed. That is Proud by Gareth Thomas. Gareth Thomas is a Welsh rugby player, and he is also an out gay man. It caused some waves when he came out. I'm not a big sport person, however, I do enjoy watching rugby, my family likes rugby, my boyfriend supports Welsh rugby, and I should say Wales rugby team. Correct wording there, Sophie. So I'm familiar with Gareth Thomas as a media figure, and I have a base knowledge of rugby to be vaguely interested in this. Do you remember earlier in this video, way back when, where I said I'm really enjoying reading Own Voices LGBT content? That's why I wanted to read this. this was really good. This is such an honest autobiography. I know that I think it's co-written or like ghost written, like I can't remember the name of the guy, but they had interviews and then the guy wrote the book based on the interviews with Gareth Thomas, so it's not like entirely his sitting with a pen, but like contributed. This was very honest, but not in a like self-flagellating way, but in like just a here is my story, this is what happened. I will say that this can be a bit heavy going at times because Gareth Thomas has attempted suicide multiple times and he does talk to you about that, and his struggle to accept his sexuality and to come out to both friends and the public was a journey for him, and a big journey, and one that was not always easy, and he does focus on that a lot. So if that's something that you can't really do in your head, then don't read this. But otherwise, this was really great. I particularly enjoyed some of the chapters post his public coming out. One in particular is one where he shares excerpts of letters / stories of people who have contacted him after he came out to share how his coming out has affected their lives. So for example, he talked about this guy called Gareth, who's a 50-year-old man, and he invited all of his family over for a meal, and then he came out, sat down in a pink top, and was like, if Gareth Thomas can wear pink and play rugby for Wales and be an out gay man, then so can I. And stuff like this. Then he shared there were letters from people from different countries, and countries that are very homophobic, stuff like this. And I really enjoyed that, because I really enjoy when people who are LGBT in the public eye use their voices to uplift and support other people. And I felt like this book did a lot of that, especially towards the latter half. He talks a lot about how he has talked a lot with other sportsmen who are gay, who haven't come out or don't want to come out or who are struggling to come out and stuff like that, and how he's talked to them a lot, and how he's talked a lot to just people on the street, stuff like this, who come up to him and share their stories with him. And there's this I really admire a thread that runs throughout this, which is that when he was struggling with his sexuality and would go to gay bars and stuff like this, he wanted to return the support that the LGBT community had given to him, and now that he's in the public eye and has sort of a platform, he wants to use that platform to help. He does this through, he works with some charities, and he just does this through just, you know, challenging stereotypes on what a gay man is. And, you know, just to clarify that statement, you can be as stereotypically gay as you want to be. You do you, boo. But also, it is quite good to have figures in the public eye like Gareth Thomas, who embody a lot of what we would stereotypically assign to, like, heterosexual men, and show that you can be all of that and be a gay man. There are no limits, and there is no... You don't have to tick a number of boxes to successfully be a gay man. You just have to be a man who is gay. This turned into a ramble. Suffice to say, this was just a really good autobiography. I also, like, there's also a lot of stuff about rugby in this. I'm sure if you were more of a rugby fan than I am, it would be really interesting. To me, it was just interesting. It was good. I liked it. I didn't feel at any point like I was out of my depth because I'm not a massive rugby fan. I was like, yeah, I understand what you're telling me, Gareth. Thank you. God, this went on. I feel like this has been an incredibly long video. I'm hoping I've edited it down somewhat, but this has been a rambly mess from this end of the screen. That's it. I'll try and make sure the next one of these is a bit shorter, all that jazz. That's it from me for now. I hope you're having a really, really lovely day. I will see you next week for something.